Hello everyone, I am Merla Agnes Mary, Assistant Professor, Department of Computer Science, St. Joseph's College, Tiruchirappalli. In this lecture video, we're going to see the OSI layer and the different layers of OSI. So what is OSI? There is an open system interconnection that is used to when two persons or two computers sharing their data. So it starts from the sender to receiver and start from the application layer to the physical layer, and the receiver side it start from the physical layer to the application layer. Let's we see each layer one by one. So let's we see what is OSI layers and the different 7 layers of OSI. So the contents we're going to see is first the introduction about the OSI layer, then the first layer of the OSI physical layer, second data link layer, and the third layer network layer, and the fourth layer transport layer, and the session layer, and the presentation layer, and application, and the end we're going to see the conclusion. Let's we see one by one. So the first is introduction. So the OSI model was created in 1984 by the ISO, that is International Standards Organization. So it is the framework they frame for explaining how the data must be transmitted from one computer to another computer. So OSI stands for the Open System Interconnection, and it is a reference model. So it describes how the software application from one system and sends the data from the one system of software application to the another system of software application. It sends the data through the physical medium. So in other words, we can say in OSI, from the OSI, we come to know how the two systems are communicated. So the OSI model allows the network administrator to focus the design of the particular layers. So each layers have its own execution process, and it starts from the 7th layer to the first layer. So that is, it is communicated from the one person to the another person. So it have the 7 layers, and it starts from the 7th layer to the first in the sender side layer. So each layer performs a specific job, and each layer has its own job, and it sends the data from the one layer to the another layer. Let's see what are the layers. The first is a physical layer, and the second is the data link layer, and the third is a network layer, and the fourth transport layer, and fifth session layer, sixth presentation layer, and the last layer is an application layer. So in sender side, it starts from the application layer and ends in the physical layer. In the receiver side, it starts from the physical layer and it ends in the application layer. Let's we see one by one. So the first is the physical layer. So the physical layer, it transmits the data in the form of bits. And in this data link layer, it transfers the data in the form of frames with an error-free transfer. And in third, the network layer, it transfers the data in the form of packets from the source to destination. And the fourth is the transport layer. That is a reliable message delivery, and it transfer the data in the form of segments from the one process to the another process. And the session layer. So session layer is to manage and terminate the session. And the presentation layer, it is responsible for transformation, compressions, and the encryption. And the last application layer, so it is directly provide the services to the user. Let's see the one by one. So first is the physical layer. So physical layer is an important layer which transmit the bits from the one node to the another node. So it is the lowest layer, and it establishes, maintains, and deactivates the physical connection. So it's specifically work based on the mechanical, electrical, and procedural network interfaces. So the functions of the physical layer are, the first function is it is line configuration, and the second is data transmission, and the third is topology, and the fourth is signals. As we see each functions one by one. So first is a line configuration. It defines the how the two connected systems in a physical way. And the second, data transmission. So it transfer the data from one node to another node, and which data flow will be connected is based on the data transmission. It have the three main modes of the data transmission, that is simplex mode, half duplex mode, and full duplex mode. The simplex mode, it is only in the one-way transmission, and the half duplex, it is in the both transmission, but not in a simultaneous way. And the full duplex, it is based on the simultaneously transmit the data in the sender and the receiver side. And the third is a topology. So topology is how the network is arranged, and network means it is a collection of systems. How the systems are arranged is known as a topology. So we have the different types of topology like a bus, a ring, a star, and mesh. So we have the different topologies. So based on this topologies, the how we come to know how the network is arranged. And the fourth is the signals. So signals is important to transmitting the information from one system to another system. So then the second layer, that is data link layer. Let's see the data link layer. So this layer is responsible for the error-free transfer of data frames. So in the physical layer, the data is in the form of bits. So the bits move into the data link layer and it formed as a frames. So in the frames, and the frames is converted, then move into the next layer. So let's see how the data link layer works. So it defines the format of the data on the network. So it provides a reliable and efficient communication between two or more devices. So it is mainly on uniquely identify the each devices. So based on the physical layer, it connects with the node, and in the data link layer, it identifies the each system uniquely. And it contains the two sublayers. The first sublayer is logic link control layer, and the second is the media access control layer. Let's see the two sublayers. What is? So the first is a logic link layer. So it is responsible for transferring the packets to the network of the receiver side. So it identifies the address of the network protocol, because the next of the data link layer is the network layer. So it identifies the address of the network and it sends the frames to the network layer. And the second is the media access layer. So the MAC address, so MAC layer is used to link between the logic link control layer, that is the network physical layer. So it is used to transferring the packets over the network layer. So let's see the functions of data link layer. So the first function is framing. So framing used to organize the frames from the frames from it from the data link layer. So the bit pattern is sent from the physical layer, and in the data link layer it forms the data in form of the frame. And the second is physical addressing. So a physical addressing is also known as the MAC address. So it is uniquely identify the sender or the receiver. And the third is the flow control. So it is used to avoid the corrupted frames and maintain the data transmission. And the fourth is the error control. So error control is also important to control the error and detect the error control, and the lost frames will be retransmitted. And the fifth is the access control. So it is used to access and between multiple devices and connected multiple devices to the same communication channel. Let's see how the data link layer works. So in the sender side, it gets the data from the network layer and transmit to the physical layer. In the receiver side, it gets the data as a bit from the physical layer and sends to the transport layer. Then the third layer is network layer. So the network layer works for the transmission of data from the one host to the another host. Then it is how the located in the different networks. And it takes care of the packet routing. So it selects the shortest path to send the data. So then the sender and the receiver IP address is placed in the header by the network layer. So the network layer is primarily uses the two internet protocols, that is IPv6 and IPv4. So the network layer get the IP address that is unique, that is used to uniquely identify the network address of the system. So let's see the functions of the network layer. The first function is routing. So this is used to find and send the data from the source to destination. And the second is the logical addressing. So this is what the IP address. It is used to uniquely identify, and it is universally, it can also access universally. And the third is the packetizing. So in the network layer, the data in the form of a packet. So it gets the data from the transport layer, and it form in the packets, and it move into the data link layer as a frames. So then the network layer gets the data from the transport layer. It forms the segments into the packets, and it sends the data to the data link layer. Then in the sender side and in the receiver side, it gets the frames from the data link layer, and it sends to the transport layer. And let's see the transport layer. So the transport layer provides to the application layer and takes services from the network layer. And in the transport layer, the data is in the form of segments. So, and the transport layer is responsible for the end-to-end delivery. It is a only layer which acknowledges that the receiver is receiving the data or not. So here we have the two main protocols. That is, first protocol is transmission control protocol. So the TCP is used to communicate over the internet, and it also maintains the establishment of the connection. And the second is the UDP, that is user datagram protocol. So it is unreliable transport protocol, and it doesn't acknowledge whether the data will be sent or not, but the TCP will acknowledge and maintains the connection. And the UDP doesn't acknowledge or make the connection between the sender or receiver. So then see the functions of the transport layer. The first function is the segmentation and reassembly. And the second function is the service point addressing. Let's see the segmentation and reassembly. So the transport layer divides into the data streams into the form of a smaller segment. So after the data from the session layer, so the data is in the form of data, and the data is divided into the smaller segment. That's why it is easier to send the data to the streams. So then it is reassembled based on the number in the segments. So then the service point addressing. So the service point addressing is none other than the port address. So already we see the MAC address in the data link layer and the IP address in the network layer, and the transport layer, it checks the port address. So based on the port address, the message will be delivered to the correct process. So here we going to see the services provided by the transport layer. We have the two types of services, that is connection oriented and the connection-less services. So the connection-oriented services is based on the TCP, that is transport control protocol, and the connection-less services is based on the UDP, that is user datagram protocol. So in connection-oriented service, we have the three phases. That is, first phase is connection establishment phase, and the second phase is data transfer phase, and the third phase is termination or disconnection phase. In connection establishment phase, the connection will be first established to the sender to the receiver side, and if the receiver is acknowledge the sender's message, then the data will be transferred from the sender to receiver. After the sending the data, the receiver will send the acknowledgement that we received. So after the acknowledgement from the receiver, the termination, the connection will be disconnected, and it forms the proper data communication. But in the connectionless services, it doesn't check whether the receiver is in the correct position. So it doesn't check whether the receiver is in the online or something, it is in a connection, but it has only one phase, that is data transfer phase. So it sends the data from the sender to the receiver and doesn't get any acknowledgement. So examples of connection oriented is TCP, ATM, that is asynchronous transfer mode, then frame relay, then multi-protocol label switching. So then the connectionless service examples are the UDP and the IP. Let's see how the transport layer will be work. So the data from the session layer will be get into the transport layer, and the data is divided into the multiple segments with the header format. So based on the header, the data will be arranged and it move into the network layer. Then in the receiver side, so from the network layer, it move into the transport layer and it forms in the form data as a segments, and the segments is move into the session layer in the format of data. Then session layer. So this layer is responsible for establishing connection, maintaining sessions, and authenticating and ensuring the security. So this is the fifth layer of the OSI. So, and it is responsible for terminating the connections and managing the connection. That is the between the applications. So it is this primary purpose is to maintain the connection between the applications across the network. So the functions of session layers are, the first function is the session management. So session management is responsible for establishing, managing, and terminating the connections. So it have the three phases like the transport layer. So the first phase is the session establishment phase. So in this phase, the communication based on the rules given. So the two devices are proposed and agreed. And the second phase is the data transfer phase. After the after the connection is made, so it transfer the data, and finally the connection termination phase will be work, and the connection will be terminated. And the second function of the session layer is synchronization. And the synchronization will work as to add the checkpoints. So it identifies the errors and it sends the data properly to prevent the data loss. And the third function is dialog controller. So the dialog controller is based on the half duplex or the full duplex. The half duplex is the two-way communication, but not in a simultaneous. And the full duplex is the two-way communication, but in a simultaneous. This is how the dialog controllers work. And the fourth is the authentication. So because the session layer is ensure of the security, so it authenticate the user. So which and it sends the user to allow use the application. And the fifth one is authorization. After the authentication, the person will be authenticated and sends to the application after verifying whether the person is true. Then the work of this session layer is it gets the data from the presentation layer and it synchronizes and it moves into the transport layer in the sender side. In receiver side, it get the data from the transport layer as a segments, and it form the data in the form of data and moves into the presentation layer. And the sixth layer is presentation layer. Let's see the presentation layer. So presentation layer is also called as a translation layer. So the data it get from the application layer and sent into the session layer. So it is extracted and manipulated and it changes the format to transmit over the network. So this layer is a part of the operating system. So this layer is used to convert the data into the different format. So that is what the encryption and decryption will be work here. As you see the functions of the presentation layer, the first function is the data translation. So in the data translation, it converts the data from the one format to the another format. So like user language to the machine language, it's also converted. So the second is the data encryption and decryption. For the security purpose, in the session layer, it will be authenticated and authorized to the person. And in the presentation layer, the data will be encrypted and decrypted as in the different format. So it is for the data integrity. And the third is the data compression. So because it is used to reduces the bits, because of the bandwidth and the net to transmit the data to your ECD. So it reduces the bits. And the fourth is the syntax and semantics. So the syntax and semantics of the information will be exchanged between the two devices to ensure that the data is in the correct structure. This is how the presentation layer work. It gets the data from the application layer and encoded, encrypted, and the compressed data will be moved into the session layer. And in the receiver side, the data from the session layer will be get and decoded, decrypted, and decompress the data and move into the transport layer. Then the application layer, the last layer of the OSI. So it is the last layer of the OSI. It is closer to the end user and it provides the network services directly to the user, and it facilitates the communication between the application program interfaces that is closer to the end user. And the applications used in the application layer initiate the communication with the network and send the data to the presentation layer. And the application layer provides the different types of protocols like HTTP, FTP, DNS, and SMTP, and it enables the software to send and receive the data. So we have the 4 different functions of the application layer. The first function is the NVT, that is Network Virtual Terminal. So Network Virtual Terminal is a protocol that enables remote access to the computer system or network. And the second is the mail services. So we have the 3 different types of protocols for mail services, that is SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, that is used to send that mail, and the POP3, that is Post Office Protocol version 3, it is used to download the mail, and the IMAP, that is Internet Message Access Protocol, it is simply to access the mail services. And the third is a file transfer access and management. So this is used to allow the user to access a file in a remote host and retrieve the files and manage or control the files in a remote computer. And the last function is the directory services. So this is used to distribute the database sources in the global information. So it is also used to store the data and about the various objects and the services. So in the conclusion, from this we see the 7 layers. So the OSI represents of the open system interconnection. So it is a vertical approach. How the vertical approach is start from the application layer and move into the session layer, and then the present and then the transport and ends in the physical layer in the sender side, and the receiver side it start from the physical layer and it end in the application layer in the form of the vertical approach. Then it enable the communication between the devices, ensuring the reliable and efficient transfer across the networks. And each layer has a specific function and interact with each other and provide a comprehensive framework for the networking. So then OSI is designed as a theoretical model to guide the development of the network standards. From the OSI, nowadays we move on to the TCP and IP. So thank you, everyone. So I hope you all learn the different layers of the OSI, from the application to presentation, presentation to session, and session to transport, and transport to the network layer, and network layer to the data link to the physical layer. So these 7 layers are in the form of the theoretical model. So nowadays we using the TCP IP in a practical way. So the TCP IP have the 4 different layers. So the 7 layers is minimized into the 4 layers from the that is the application layer, then transport layer, then the network layer, and the internet layer. So in the internet layer, we only have the 2 layers, that is physical layer and data link layer combined as the internet layer, and then the network layer, and then transport layer, and then the application layer. So the application is combined above the 3 layers, that is presentation, session, and the application layer. So nowadays the TCP IP in the practical way, so yeah, the OSI is the basic of this TCP IP. So thank you everyone, and thank you for learning.